So hello everyone. Thank you for joining us here on our last webinar of the year. Today we're going to talk about vendor management, and we're going to focus on our experience with credit unions. My name is Ed Sullivan. I am the founder and CEO of Trust Exchange, and I'm joined by our VP of Customer Success, Susan Cammons. And what we'll do is I'll go through a quick overview of our platform, the company, our platform, how our platform works, why we think it's not just a little better, but a lot better. And then if we have time, we'll get into a demo and some questions. So if you have questions, there should be a chat at the bottom or a place for you guys to post questions. And if there are no questions, I have kind of several questions that I can, from the past, that I can kind of prime the pump with. Okay, so let's get started. That being said, the name of the company is Trust Exchange, and we are a B2B social network. So we're a community of businesses who securely disclose and monitor key information to increase their trust in each other. And we have many applications. One of the key applications is compliance. And one of the areas where we provide a lot of value is compliance for financial institutions and other highly regulated industries. So we have customers in credit unions, banking, pharma, healthcare, etc. So we think that our platform has a unique approach, and the experience that we have is that it can save 50 to 80%, but we'll talk about a specific use case of a mid-sized credit union that was able to save $20,000 within the first year. Actually, a small credit union, $20,000 in the first year and $100,000 over a 3-year period by leveraging the features in our platform. So I'm not sure if you know about the collaborative economy, but basically, because of the internet and because a lot of social technologies, the world's changing. And the collaborative economy is a group of companies and platforms that collapse the steps between the creator of a good or a service and the consumer of a good and a service. So examples are Uber. You used to have to go to a taxi company, call a dispatcher, or schedule an appointment. And now with Uber, you can bypass all of that, go right to people that own cars that are willing to give you a ride, that are pre-checked, etc., and collapsing the layers between the creator of a service and the purchaser of the service. Same thing with Airbnb and hotels, Zipcar with cars, and then also Waze for traffic, directions, accidents, police, etc. So we feel like we are solidly in this collaborative economy in that we collapse the layers between the creator of business information and the consumers of business information. Our progress to date, so we started in 2010, and our progress to date is that we have about 20,000 users on the platform that are in turn tracking 100,000 different companies, sharing information, reputation, operational information, subjective information such as news, new customers, press releases, and then also objective information, financial information, credit reports, etc. So how does this apply for banks and credit unions? So as probably everyone on the call is aware, that since Dodd-Frank, there's been a lot of accelerating regulatory pressure to manage third parties and vendors specifically. So here are some quotes from different analysts, the FDIC, the IDC, et cetera. But the bottom line is that regulators, state, and the various flavors of federal regulators are beginning to pay attention to this, levying fines, et cetera. Credit unions are kind of in an interesting space, based on my opinion, based on my observation. There's the aspect of credit unions and what I call super vendors, where CUSOs, for instance, would be a super vendor, where there are vendors that supply services. They are a vendor, and they have vendors, but they supply not just one service, but a suite of services to a financial institution or credit union. And one of the challenges there is that you may have to monitor them, because the way the rules work is they have to monitor a vendor based on their risk profile to you. So you may have a CUSO where you're monitoring them for multiple services that they're providing, and just monitoring them at the highest level for if they're a core processor may not be sufficient if you're also using them as a call center, and you need to make sure that the call center has all of the criteria that is required. So this is an interesting fact that came from an examiner at the FDIC. When he spoke publicly last year, that 46% of examinations which resulted in a downgrade were because of inadequate vendor management. So like I said, they're beginning to pay attention. It was a slow road from Dodd-Frank to here, but the pressure seems to be accelerating. So the main thing that makes this really kind of more expensive than it used to be to manage and maintain is that the regulators want the financial institutions to treat this as a life cycle, a compliance life cycle. So not just do the due diligence and then recheck it once a year, but understand the frequency of that life cycle from selection to implementation, operational to renewal, and where are the risk points and how frequently are you monitoring those things. So we did a kind of a quick ROI and a study on the old requirements versus the new requirements. And in the old requirements, it was still pretty heavy lifting that you had to do to be compliant. But we took a sampling of a few small banks and credit unions and just kind of did an old time study on how many hours does it take you to do due diligence and contract management, data collection, et cetera. And we got a range of about $500 to $1,000 per vendor per year. And that range goes from non-critical vendors up to critical vendors. When you layer on the new requirements, looking at the objective, subjective, operational data monitoring, creating visibility throughout the enterprise, reports, et cetera, the cost went up, not just incrementally, not just 10% or 20%, but 5x or 10x. So one of the confusion points is people, when people talk about how the new regulations are burdensome from a cost perspective, this is why. It's an exponential increase in transactions and interactions that you have to have with all the third parties in order to manage your risk. The current solutions that are out there are linear, right? So they're QA by sampling. I'm going to hunt for the red flags. I'm going to go chase this down, look at this document, look at this audit. Data is pulled from the vendor. It's expensive, it's reactive, and it's non-scalable. So it's up and down non-scalable. So imagine if you have an infinite number of vendors, you can't keep track this way. But even if you have a small number of vendors, doing it manually might be sufficient, but it's really not okay from the perspective of the regulatory aspect. You're not storing the document correctly. It might be a liability having these different documents, et cetera. So for multiple reasons, the solutions that are out there, the manual, the spreadsheets, and even some of the software solutions that are out there don't really give you what you need to compete in this exponential world that you're being presented with. So here's an example of why it can get so complex, right? So imagine there's, a whole series of credit unions and then a whole series of vendors. Basically, each financial institution is pinging the vendor, asking for, I need this document, I need that document at different frequencies, monthly, quarterly, annually. I need these 5 documents, these 6 documents. And it's a two-sided problem. So not only are the credit unions and the banks burdened by these tasks, but imagine you're sitting in the seat of the vendor where you have all of these requests inbound for confidential information that you're distributing all over the place. So what we provide over here on the right is a platform to enable to have a couple things happen. Thing number one is the credit unions or the banks or the pharma companies can broadcast to the network what their policies are for each category of risk, what their policies are for each vendor type, et cetera, push the rules out to the vendors, and then the vendors can reciprocate by submitting that information directly to the Trust Exchange. We have a whole lot of security so that their documents can be safe. You don't have to worry about the liability of emailing that document around or leaving it on a fax machine or a printer. Um, and then furthermore, the vendors can broadcast it to all of their customers. So we make it very cost effective to do it. So one of the things that we're seeing that probably isn't the best practice is that it's so expensive to monitor vendors that a lot of credit unions will only monitor their high risk vendors, not all of the vendors. The rule and the regulations say monitor all of your vendors in a risk appropriate way. So that might look like a burden, but it also is a path forward to reducing expenses and reducing risk. So if you could, so with our system, you can monitor all of your vendors, create custom risk ranking policies, create custom risk ranking, high, medium, low, but you could get more granularity on that. So you're not limited to just 3 classifications of risk. You can have N classifications of risk. A high risk construction project is as risky as a high risk IT, but the things that you need to do to monitor the risk of those 2 vendor types are vastly different. So just putting people into 3 buckets, putting vendors into 3 buckets doesn't really solve the solution. The other part of our system is that you can create custom compliance rules for each of these. Using that prior example, here are the custom compliance rules for construction vendors. Here are the custom compliance rules for my core processor. Here are the low risk facilities vendors and the janitorial vendors and so on and so forth. And here are the low risk IT vendors that may be just doing my website or doing some kind of electronic brochures or landing pages or something like that. So combining all of this, making it so that the alerts are pushed to you so that you're managing by exception versus managing every single transaction and interaction that you have with all of these third parties. So pause right there for a second. That's the scope of the problem. That's kind of what we provide. We think that we have a very unique solution. We also think that there are significant cost savings. And we also think that the credit union industry is ripe for this because there is a more cooperative type of atmosphere, willing to share due diligence. It's not, if you have a direct competitor in your town or in your city, the fact that vendor FIS has a SOC 3 for some service that they may be providing for you isn't top secret. So why isn't it okay for you guys to share just that it exists? You may not be able to share the document itself, but the fact that they have it and that it's been updated, they passed a penetration test, or even around news stories. Hey, this company was just breached. Everybody should be paying attention to this. So being able to broadcast stuff out to the network is also a key part of what we provide.